because we're all, oh, there's record.
Yeah. So that's recording to my computer.
Okay.
You know, so from the way it's seeming to me right now, we might as well just get started, and either it'll figure itself out sometime during, or I'll just post later after we're all done.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me know when you do, or tag me or whatever, and I got a bunch of groups I'll post it to. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Well, start us off, guys.
Alrighty. Yeah. All right. We're here tonight. It's a really special night. We're sitting with George Greg Lake tonight so that we can discuss his book series. Particularly, we'll be discussing tonight his book, Psychedelics and Mental Health on Psilocybin. Awesome, Greg. Can you introduce us? How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Again, I know I told y'all earlier, but thanks for having me. My legal name's George Gregory Lake. Everyone who knows me calls me Greg. So that's why if you see me online, it's under Greg Lake. Yeah, do you want me to kind of just give you my background, or what all would you like me to cover? I'm an open book.
Yeah, can you give us a bit of your background and then just a brief synopsis of your book so we can discuss it?
Yeah. So my life has been quite challenging. I grew up in Marshall, Texas, in a kind of a small town. I had an idyllic childhood, and I've became addicted to hard drugs and alcohol at the age of 12, and kind of followed that path. But through the whole process, I was able to keep it together well enough to go through college, go through law school. My final year of law school, I take back my second year of law school during the second semester finals, my mother passed away from a sudden heart attack. So that kind of added fuel to my addiction. And so I ended up, by the grace of God, getting through law school, passed the Texas bar, and became a partner in a law firm in Texas. Well, by that time, my addiction had grew beyond what I could manage. And within 2 years from that point, I was not practicing law. I was homeless. I had been arrested several times, and found myself in jail in January 2015. I had failed a drug test for probation. At that time, I was given the option of either going back on the streets on probation or going to get inpatient treatment. I chose the latter. So I ended up at a place called Synacor. It's which y'all might be familiar with in Denver. It's a Therapeutic community. The original one was up that way, which is very intense. It's a very hard program. And I did 31 months there. Let me backtrack a little bit. So right after my mother had passed away in 2010, I began to eat, which I had eaten psilocybin and other psychedelics prior to that point. But that summer, I had my first, what I would call, mystical experience at a ranch in South Texas. I consumed a large enough dose in the right setting to really get the spiritual, mystical effects from the medicine. So that kind of tipped me off at that point that, hey, there's something here. I mean, I had a lot of good epiphanies and spiritual epiphanies that, you know, and I say this to people all the time, but like in sufficient doses, psilocybin to me is like an information download. And so at that time, I feel like I downloaded quite a bit of information. And then subsequent to that, even though I was in my addiction, I still had several mystical experiences, usually out in nature on psilocybin, prior to me going to Synacor. So started Synacor early 2016, graduated September 2018, at which point I was able to get a cell phone again. I had been cut off from pretty much all outside communications during my tenure there. So once I was able to do that, I started seeing, so I got back into practicing law. I do maritime personal injury work here in Baton Rouge. But in my free time, I kept seeing, you know, article after article about the state of psilocybin research, which, you know, to my knowledge, before I went to rehab, you know, wasn't that developed. But accordingly, while I was in rehab and shortly thereafter, once I graduated, it really progressed. And so I saw a lot of articles online, and me being the try to be the intellectual that I am, I kind of got frustrated because the articles were kind of discombobulated and disjointed. Even though I read all these articles, I didn't have a clear picture in my mind of exactly the state of the research. And so that kind of prompted me, in conjunction with a spiritual vision that I had, to write this book. I wanted to create a resource where, the reader or someone who's interested in this area, or even someone who might not have their mind made up in this area about their thoughts or feelings on psilocybin, could pick up the book, read it through, see what research has been done, even some far back research from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And then also learn, I cover in there like the current FDA trials, so the current state of the research as well. And then I finished my book up with a chapter on legalization, which I cover, the Denver initiative and also the 2 in California, and then also cover the upcoming Oregon initiative. And I was actually able to talk to a gentleman out in California about the statewide measure that was supposed to go on the ballot this year, but from my understanding, it's probably going to be going on the ballot next year. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I published the book. It took me about 2.5 months to write it and publish it. And to be honest, since I wrote the book, tons of side projects have opened up. I've been very fortunate to get very involved in the space. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at today, talking to y'all. Just blessed.
Well, let's brag on Cass for a second, because she's actually flown to California a couple times and helped them gather petition signatures, didn't you?
Yeah, I was helping with the campaign out there for a while. Unfortunately, we were not able to get the petition signatures that we needed given the current ridiculous COVID situation. But hopefully it will be on the ballot for 2022. I guess there's like some regulatory issues where we can't have it on next year, but 2022, really hoping, fingers crossed. I was really excited that that initiative was pushing for legalization of, or decriminalization of sale as well, which was unlike a lot of other campaigns I've heard of. Yeah. But yeah, hopefully looking forward with that. That sounds like it was a really big journey for you getting up to this book. And I really appreciate all the work that you put in to compiling all of that information. I have the forward and acknowledgements pulled up here. Would you mind if I read the first paragraph?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay. First and foremost, I write this book for all those who are currently suffering from depression and addiction, which I really like that a lot. I was addicted to drugs for 17 years of my life and eventually ended up homeless approximately 5 years ago. Through my addiction, I lost a lot of things and almost lost my life. To say I am grateful to be alive and sober today is an understatement, and obviously God has much bigger plans for me. Unfortunately, many do not survive a crippling opiate addiction. Reading this as like the very first part of the book, I feel like this is a really loud statement. Was this like when you sat down, did you start with this and then you're like, I'm going to share this story and share this research that I found? Or did you start in a different place of the book?
Yeah, so it's funny you brought that up. I actually wrote that part last. And you know, I kind of checked my intentions all the way through writing the book, and tried to stay focused on what my intention was as I went through it. And when I came back that night to write that part, I had all these thoughts going through my head. So what I did, and I did this quite a few times in the book when I came to a block, I just hopped in my car and took maybe a 20-minute drive on some back roads and just listened to music and cleared my head and got some inspiration. And I remember that particular drive. Yeah, I just had this heartfelt moment where I said, you know, who am I here to help, and what am I grateful for? And so when I got home after that, I let that flow out, let it flow. And that's just kind of how I spit it out. That's really what you just read is really truly from my heart.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I like that you put that in your book as a place to share with other people. That's very personal, and I really appreciate that.
And real quick on that too, and I kind of touch on it in the first part too, is that, you know, while I was in Synacor for all that time, I saw so many people obviously struggling with addiction, but also with a plethora of mental health issues. And I'm sure, as y'all are aware, especially Desmond, you know, the medical establishment's first and only response to that is, here's these pills, take them every day. And I didn't see a lot of healing going on with the mental health issues. Maybe some were able to get over their addiction, but the depression, anxiety, it stayed with them despite the medication regime. And, you know, with my prior experience, I knew that there were other alternatives out there, natural alternatives, that could have probably really helped some of these people. And, you know, there's quite a few people I was in there with who are now dead from drug overdoses. And, you know, I can't help but think that maybe some of those people could have got the help with their depression or anxiety that could have helped push them past the point where they went back out and chose to use again. And so that kind of motivated that first part as well, and my overall purpose in writing the book.
So you bring up a good point. You know, prior to the discovery of psilocybin, we had no like awareness that we had serotonin in our brains. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, doctors only knew about it through the digestive system. And, you know, you see you have like that second brain in your gut. But, you know, if you look at like the chemical structure for psilocybin, it looks, you know, almost identical to serotonin. It just got like one extra hydrogen molecule added into it. So, you know, it doesn't take that much of a wizard to see that piece in the, you know, they say it's like the key in the lock and how it fixes it, you know, how the neurotransmitter fits into the lock, and it looks almost identical to the lock for serotonin in your brain. And so, you know, we wouldn't have any of the modern day serotonin drugs had it not been for the discovery of psilocybin. You know, that's what spurred like Purdue to make Prozac, you know, in the early 80s. It was based off, the government gave them a bunch of money in the like 60s to hack the formula for LSD, and then they used that to make that information to make Prozac later on. So, you know, and as you're saying this and talking about like all these people, you know, I'm curious about, let's rewrite history a little bit. Say you're 18, 19, you've gone through all this trauma, but history is a little different and you can participate in psilocybin assisted therapy. Like, you know, they're proposing in Oregon. How would that change your life, do you think? You know, if that was something that was FDA approved on the table for you at that stage in your life after going through these kind of like traumas, or, you know, everything that wasn't available to you that should have been available to you, how do you think that would have impacted you?
You know, to sit here and say, you know, I think a lot of it just boils down, Des, to these epiphanies that you get on psilocybin, that you kind of break through this social conditioning that we've been attuned to for so long, or taught for so long, that you start to realize what's important in life. And I will say this, that psilocybin did kind of help me get my self-esteem back, you know, and I feel like for me at the age of 18, I kind of lacked self-esteem apart from my mother. You know, my mother used to tell me how handsome and awesome I was, but really deep down, I didn't necessarily feel that. You know, I feel like maybe some psilocybin services then could have helped me develop that part, because that played such a big role in my using and just bad behaviors I was engaged in, was trying to cover up my lack of self-love and self-esteem. And I think that psilocybin in particular is good for people to help develop that self-love, either through epiphanies and realizations, or to just start generally taking care of themselves by making more healthier choices and decisions. You know, a lot of times that's brought on by the use of psilocybin.
Greg, I'm curious about, you've mentioned God a couple of times and talked about the mystical experience, and both, anecdotally from myself and friends and from reading about the research in Hopkins, it really feels and sounds like it's the mystical experience that kind of like helps you break that addiction or like let go of your depression, whatever it is that brings you to working with psilocybin. And I'm curious about, like, to the best of that you can put it in words, what was that mystical experience like for you? And, it sounds like you clearly believe in God now. Is that something you've had with you throughout your life, or is that something that came from your work with psychedelics?
So that's a good question. Very good question. So, I grew up in a Christian family. Like, we weren't like hardcore Christians. I went to church, every Sunday when I was young. But as I got older, my family really didn't go to church that much. So I grew up in a Christian family, but, I never was very religious or spiritual for a very long time. Through my first psilocybin experiences, my mystical experience, it opened me up to the oneness, and I think it gave me a hint of the realization in this, and I'm just going to speak on my personal spiritual religious beliefs now. I'm not saying that what I'm about to say is correct or anything like that, but it kind of opened me up to the idea that maybe God isn't necessarily this outside force that exists outside me. Now, subsequent to graduating Synacor, I was able to, through working with the medicine, develop this further. And so now I don't identify as Christian. I have nothing against people who are, and I do think that the Bible has great teachings in it that people could be guided with. But for me, through working with the medicine, it's kind of like my experience now is that we are all divine manifestations of God, and God is a great energy source that's comprised of light, love, and energy, and we are just divine, unique manifestations of that energy. And that really what it kind of what the overarching thing it informed me of in the terms of beating an addiction and just generally getting through life is that all the answers that I ever need are already inside of me. I just have to tap into them and tap into that source to pull them out and find them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you say that last bit about, being able to search within yourself and find the answers you're seeking, was that kind of the linchpin in your work with psilocybin, or was there more to it besides that?
Well, I think in terms of me staying sober and, not being depressed, not being anxious, or, just being able to overcome everyday life problems. Yeah, that was the linchpin. But as far as, let's say, overarching spirituality and, my views on death or an afterlife, those were more informed by the realization that we are all divine manifestations of, the same source. In that, I came to realize that for me, my view is that once we pass from this life, we go back and unite with the source, and so that's where that kind of realization went. But yeah, as far as everyday life, that realization that all the answers are inside me, yeah, it really helps. And I think for people who are addicts, who keep looking outside of themselves for all these answers on how to beat, their addiction or depression. I mean, I think the psilocybin in the right set and setting can really help them look internally for all those answers that they need.
Awesome.
Exactly. The co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, he tried to incorporate LSD as like one of the steps, like back in the 50s. And it was all hinged on this fact that, his belief that you need a spiritual, experience for sobriety, to kick in. So, I don't consider myself a religious person. I think, I have a brain and I get like a traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer's or dementia, like there's just going to be parts of my personality that decay, and that doesn't mean I'm going to, that's how I am right now is going to be embedded somewhere, you know, spiritually, that, you know, that there's not going to be an afterlife of how I'm thinking and feeling right now. So, you know, but I still, you know, have had those mystical experiences on psychedelic, you know, medicines, and thought that was very helpful, you know, to have, you know. So let us, what was your kind of aha moment, you know, like in your recovery phase for, you know, your use of like psychedelic medicines, and what was there, like, was it a specific moment, or was it kind of like the accumulation of several moments or uses? What's your story?
So, and I tell people this all the time, and I'm going to go back to my statement that I made about information download on psilocybin. Actually, when I started in Synacor, once I reached about the 6-month mark of sobriety, I started going back. I don't want to call it flashbacks, but I kept going back because, you know, obviously in there you're learning overtly spiritual principles, and you're also learning them through the structure of the program. And so I started to notice that I would go back to those times with the psilocybin, that I would have these epiphanies, and then I would remember them and say, oh my God, this is exactly what applies to this principle here that I'm trying to learn. And I think what it helped me do, and again, this was years after my first uses of psilocybin when I wasn't actively using it, but it was, you know, even then I was able to use the epiphanies years later that I came to give me an overall greater sense of emotional stability. You know, in the therapeutic community, it's set up to keep you in your feelings. You know, you're constantly facing adversity. And I think the overarching lesson that you're supposed to get through that time is emotional control, being able to control your emotions, being able to realize what's important, what's not, you know, if it doesn't apply, let it fly type thing. And I think my use of the mushrooms prior to that really helped me achieve that state quicker than my peers, and really achieve that state and keep it up until today. You know, after I got out, I think what I was informed through those periods or those times was, again, that's when I really started getting into this spiritual concepts or ideas that have informed my view of you know, life today. And you know, there were some rough times whenever I first graduated from Synacor. I mean, I literally had enough money to get an apartment and pay my first month's bills. And so I really struggled financially for about a year. And, you know, through those times, it just really taught me how to stay centered and keep a certain peace of mind, in that it reinforced, and this was something we learned in Synacor, is that, you know, keep a positive attitude at all times. Sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. And so those times with it really solidified that idea. And I learned in my life that if I do stay positive, even in seemingly negative or hard situations, like, things really just worked out my way. And it was all dependent on my attitude, which I could go, but, you know, that's kind of like keeping a positive vibration. I started to really believe in that. And it was informed through those times after Synacor. And yeah, it just really helped me, because, to be honest, that first year out of Synacor, there were some times where I was having really intrusive thoughts of using that were really brought on by the challenges I was facing. And it was at those times that I would, you know, use the medicine that really just solidified what I was doing and why I should stay away and why I should just keep rolling despite all the adversity I was facing.
Greg, I really like how you mentioned that you achieved that state quicker than your peers because of the psilocybin, but not inherently because you used the psilocybin. It just like expedited your process. And I've noticed that myself too in some personal growth I've had on my own. It is not to say that I could not have reached those states without it, but it helped me get there sooner.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it took a lot of work on my part as well. Again, you know, especially in a place that's hard like Synacor, I don't care how many psychedelic medicines you've engaged in and what kind of epiphanies you've received. If you're not in your heart ready for a change and ready to do what's necessary to change, they're not going to help you. But, you know, when I got there, I was honestly ready to change, and I was going to do whatever it took to change. And so I think with a sincere heart, that's how it was able to help me. You know, I think if I would have gone there with a different mindset from the start, I probably wouldn't have reached a state to where I could access those epiphanies and lessons, or I feel that might have been the case.
Yeah, you know, they've done like long-term studies of kids where they teach them deep breathing exercises and basically like teach kids how to meditate like in kindergarten, and then they like follow them into college. And you know, they're less likely to drop out of college, you know, than the control group, or high school, more likely to go through college. So it's, you know, these basic skills that if you teach kids at a young age, you know, it sets them up for success. And if you grow up in a period of history where it's like you just spank the kid, you know, you got to
Yep.
physically discipline the kid, you know, that's not teaching them those skills. So, you know, it's like, man, like I wish I would have learned that 20 years ago. You know, that would have really set me up for success. And I cut Andrew off and I started. So Andrew, what were your thoughts?
I was just going to say, I'm really glad that you spoke to having to do the work, you know, because I think that it can be really easy in seeing a lot of the research that's coming out now to like, look at psilocybin as a magic pill. And the thing that I love about psychedelics is that they are not a magic pill. It just kind of like gives you a syllabus. You know, it's like you have this problem, and this problem, and you have to address them. And like, yeah, by the way, everything is this one thing and we're all connected. Also, you have to do this shit or, you know, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You know, just so glad to hear you speak to that. What was that process like for you? I mean, obviously you're speaking about being in center core and having those intrusive thoughts after the fact, but you know, what was that work process like for you?
Man, it was rough. I mean, you know, Synacor is a place with a lot of rules, and you're expected to hold each other accountable on the rules. They're going to hold you accountable on the rules. It's intensive work. I mean, you're working 12 to 15 hours a day there. And so it just kind of, and I guess that's kind of how I access this information, because it's so rough that the only way you can make it through some days is to really dig down deep inside of yourself and search for those answers within you to how you're going to be able to make it through that day and through the long term at Synacor. And so I guess the situations that I found myself in there, you know, at night I would have to lay down and just internalize everything that's going on and say, how can I make this easier? How can I make this bearable? What ideas fundamentally can I implement to get me through this? And I think that's probably the point where I came to going back, you know, to this one epiphany I had at the ranch. And it was like, you know, all these little things do not matter in the long run. Like, do not get caught up in the details. Like, you know, all these things that a lot of people attach so much significance to are really insignificant. And so just with that one epiphany, I was able to go through my daily life and literally throw out from any kind of consideration or give any weight 90% of the stuff that was being thrown at me. You know, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to live on. That's not that important. And in a place like Synacor, where everything's meant to kind of push you into your feelings, that gives you some armor that a lot of people have a hard time getting, because let's face it, when you're getting sober, getting in your feelings is very, very easy thing to do. A lot of people there, including me at one point, were probably emotional wrecks. you know? And so over time, digging deep for me with that information and those epiphanies, was able to kind of build a shield on me to where I was able to really work on that 10% of things that I needed to take a look at. And all the other stuff, just kind of throw it to the side. So that's how it me. But again, that's work. That's work. That's work outside of just under the influence of psilocybin coming up with answers. That's years later taking those answers and actually applying them to everyday life to improve my quality of life. So yeah, I mean, taking psilocybin might be a quarter of the work. You know, there's still that 75% where people have got to sit down and make some decisions and act on it in order to really make, you know, good positive changes in their life and to improve their quality of life.
So you keep bringing up your rehab facility, and it's making thinking about my experience with psychedelics, and it's, you know, I never had to go through that where it was like a treatment, such a heavy duty treatment regimen, you know, and it's very behavioral. It sounds right. Like you have the beginning of the day, lots of structure,
Yep.
you know, but, you know, I have been, you know, went through college like you did, grad school like you did. But, you know, my studies was all in psychology. And, you know, so there was that regimen of reading and studying and tests and everything. And, you know, I could think back on my life, and I can think about like learning things and understanding things on an intellectual level. Like, you know, like this is what happens to your brain when that trauma happened. This is what happened to your brain when this trauma happened, you know, and you replay those things. And psychedelics kind of helped me to kind of fill in that gap of an intellectual understanding with an emotional understanding. Like I had done all the work and I could understand something intellectually, but the emotional part of it wasn't there. And as you're talking about this rehab, you know, regimen you went through, you know, it's making me think of like, okay, I can get that. It's like me going through school all those years and learning things, and then I do mushrooms, and it just really kind of blows up my mind about all those things I learned in class finally kind of made sense and clicked, you know, and I was like, woke up the next morning like, oh, that's what that all meant, right?
Yeah.
Do you, Andrew and Cass, does that sound right to you, like from your perspectives?
For me, I came into psychedelics more so from a really dark place of depression. And so coming into those realizations for me were similar to what Greg was speaking about earlier, about being like divine manifestations from the same source, having, I felt like a better sense of belonging, and I saw more value in myself and in my experience here. So that was kind of my path.
You know, my story, obviously the details are different, but my story is kind of similar to Greg's. I didn't go to rehab, but, you know, had a substance abuse problems, got on the wrong side of the law, you know, the whole shebang. And, you know, like with you, Greg, psychedelics kind of showed me the opportunities that I had to work on myself and the things that I was really trying to ignore. So, I mean, your story is incredibly relatable for me. I was curious, Greg, about, you know, your book, I think focuses a lot on current research, right?
Yes.
And in those cases, it's a different scenario. You know, you were talking about, I think, taking psilocybin by yourself in nature, whereas these are, you know, they've got two therapists present, and there's a soundtrack and eye shades, and of course, you were in a therapeutic setting later, so you kind of did both parts separately, whereas the trials are doing them both together. What do you think about all that in terms of effectiveness? And you brought up set and setting before, so I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about set and setting for getting the most bang for your buck out of your work with psychedelic medicine. And yeah, your thoughts on those two particular scenarios of a therapeutic setting versus a natural setting.
Okay, well, let's see. Let's start with the therapeutic setting. So I guess I would say this, for anybody who's trying to use I'm going to say this. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think psilocybin or psychedelics are for everybody. I'm just not going to say that. Now, I think for one, kind of like getting sober, I think, for psychedelics, someone has to kind of open their mind to that and say, okay, well, maybe this is something that, I'm willing to give a try. I would say for maybe first, second, third timers, either a therapeutic or maybe a controlled setting with a couple experienced people, maybe, or even a trip sitter, someone sober, would probably be advisable. Going outdoors and having a setting like that, I mean, I think people who are more comfortable and experienced can get a lot out of it. But with the research, it is what it is. That's how they have to do it. They have to control it in order to, be able to quantify the results. So, I agree with that 100%. I think the research is great. I do believe though that more people need to get the medicine than what the research is currently offering or what's currently offered. So with that being said, the idea of some people kind of going at it with other individuals who might be experienced, I'm not opposed to at all. But again, I think everyone should do their research and be informed and take all the precautions necessary. One, to ensure they're safe, but two, to make sure that they're going to have a beneficial experience. There's plenty of literature out there that someone who just on their own accord could read through and through that manipulate a good setting for themselves. Now, that obviously never guarantees that you're going to have an enjoyable, pleasant, or beneficial experience, but all these variables can be accounted for and increase the probability of having a good experience. So that's kind of how I see it, and look, I think, and let me talk real quick about where I think the future of this is going. Now, I'm sure as many of y'all are aware, there's a lot of entheogenic churches, ceremonies that are popping up, where people are using the religious protection in order to offer, ceremonious use of, psilocybin and other sacraments. From my current research, and that's putting actual eyes on the ground at these things, I mean, I think people can have a beneficial experience there against, working with people and shamans who are very experienced in dispensing the medicine. I think they could also get a lot of help there. But as far as my book is concerned, yeah, it's in the research, and I do agree with the research, and I support the research. And I think that, what they're doing there is a great setting. Obviously, it's been informed by 60 years of psychedelic research, obviously some decades more fruitful than others as far as research is concerned. And it's the standard, I guess, and that's fine. And I support that 100%. But, again, I think there are other avenues people can take to get good results.
So let's clarify everything for the lay person watching. What Greg said is totally correct. Psychedelic medicine might not be for everyone. If I'm applying for a clinical study right now and I report a history of psychosis like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder in my family, that will exclude me from that research study, just because the thought is that it could expedite my own genetic predisposition to develop some kind of psychosis myself. However, I will put an asterisk to that there are those kind of early pioneers in psychedelic research who worked with those populations, and they didn't do the macro dose, they microdosed in therapy and did a more psychoanalytic long-term therapeutic intervention, like Greg said, and they reported positive results. again, that this is like 50s and 60s research, so we're not quite there again. And continue on with that train of thought that, you know, we have to have that research. You know, there's a lot of, you know, stigma and negative connotations behind psychedelics. So that clinical model is helping to kind of dispel, you know, all that stigma behind it. And as far as what he said, as far from the indigenous perspective, it is part of the culture and tradition. And, you know, people's cultures are medicinal. You know, if a lot of the mental health issues behind American Indians is that, you know, their culture has been criminalized. So letting them have access, like the Native American Church and these different churches, to practice their medicine and traditions is healing for them, you know, as a culture. So, you know, Greg had a lot of great points there. I'm just, these are my research nicks, so I just really want to make sure, you know, we expand upon that a little bit more. So I'm curious, you know, you've been recently invited to this ceremony, and which is a big deal, you know, if you're not a part of the tribe, you know, to, you know, be accepted into this ritual. Tell us, like, but you were just, before we started recording, you were telling us a little bit about the peyote experience. Kind of fill us in. We're all about hearing about these types of things, and how do you manage being a white person, you know, in these native spaces and not feeling comfortable, right?
Yeah, so here's kind of, you know, so I went to the Peyote Ceremony, you know, which is obviously a religiously protected activity under the, you know, Federal Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, also the Texas Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, and then other federal and state statutes that specifically protect the Peyote Ceremony for the Native Americans. So yeah, so, you know, they obviously opened up their ceremony for me. I wasn't the only white person there, but, you know, there were quite a few of us there, and there were African American people there. There were people from India there. It was a very diverse group. But I will say they were still, you know, very intent on us following tradition and ceremony. And, you know, there's a lot of things I didn't know about the Peyote Ceremony that I got to know this weekend that, you know, for them, it's basically a very special prayer time that you can bring whatever desires or problems that you have into the teepee, and they start a fire. And basically it's there to pray to the fire the whole time. And specifically, they had a small family there, an Indian guy who was married to a white woman that had children. And so they were the sponsors of the ceremony. And so I guess the overall tone and prayer of it was to benefit them, but they also encouraged you to bring whatever desires or problems you had in there as well. And so it was just literally a 12 or 13 hour, you know, prayer and meditation around the fire, sitting Indian style for 13 hours with 2 brief bathroom breaks. And, you know, they told us that in real tradition, those bathroom breaks wouldn't have been had. We would have been sitting there absolutely the whole time. But, you know, with that being said, they tried to keep to the tradition as much as possible. And, you know, I'm very blessed and thankful to have been a part of it. You know, it's one of those things where I became aware of the ceremony and got invited. And I realized that, you know, not a lot of people in their lifetime will ever have an opportunity like that. So I took advantage of it. And, you know, I will say this, I had some time to speak with some of the Native American healers there. And, you know, they realize also more than ever, you know, considering the state of mental health in America and in the world, that, you know, them opening up their ceremonies for people to come and heal and pray and try to benefit spiritually or however from it, you know, is a key part of them helping out, you know, to cure the problems that we have. Not saying that everybody's going to run or go to a peyote ceremony and then, oh, we're all going to be healed of depression and addiction. But, you know, it's just another piece of the puzzle, you know, and I found that, through their wanting to help to heal even white of people of all races and colors, they are willing to accept some of us into their ceremonies, which I found endearing. And, I was very blessed to be one of them. And, one day maybe I think in the works is a book on, traditional medicine ceremonies and, how that fits into our legal system and into the mental health system. I'm curious, and I would like to maybe one day coordinate a university study of, the ubiquity of these theogenic churches popping up, not just the Native American, but other traditions as well. And then, maybe do a survey of people coming in and why they're there, and post ceremony, how do they feel they've benefited from these things, and just do an anecdotal type survey research on, how effective they are at treating these problems as well, because again, it's just another piece of the puzzle. It's not the only, and back to what you said, Desmond, for a lot of people who aren't already in this space or who have taken psychedelics before, it's really the science in the research that really starts to break down their views of psychedelics, But I will say at the same time that I think, with these ayahuasca churches and popping up and stuff, that also might play a role for some people to help break down their attitudes, because a lot of people are seeing positive changes in their life through participating in the ceremonies. And, if you're a neighbor of someone like that and you see the positive change, I can't help but think that, they put two and two together and say, hey, maybe this stuff isn't, as bad or as dangerous as, we've all been taught over the last 60 years.
Yeah. Greg, I had a question for you.
Uh-huh.
So in your extensive research and your personal experience with psilocybin and other substance use, did you notice during any of your research anything that completely caught you off guard or that particularly surprised you?
Totally surprised, no. To be honest with you, a lot of what I read and a lot of the results in the research were actually on par with my personal experience, to be honest with you. To sit here and try to think back about one thing that caught me off guard, no. No, not really. I can't say that it did, to be honest with you. The research is kind of hitting right on par. But, maybe I learned some new stuff that might have, maybe caught me by surprise a little bit. But, nothing as far as the results of the research that they're finding were right on par with what I knew. I will say that there was one study that was done, a survey study, and it's used by a lot of the researchers to kind of emphasize the dangers of psilocybin and why it should only be used in the clinical setting. Now, there was some results of that research where people reported, trying to harm themselves or others and all these other nefarious activities that were allegedly, consummated or contemplated on psilocybin. And that kind of surprised me, because I've been in the space or known a lot of people over my years that have used it, and that just, they didn't really jive with my experience with psilocybin. Or at least with people only using psilocybin. I feel like some of those results might be skewed, but that was really the only thing that kind of caught me off guard. And because in reality, I think from what I understand reading through all the studies and the research is that they can only actually confirm one case where someone has died from consuming psilocybin only. And that was in a girl who was, I think, middle-aged and had a heart transplant prior, because psilocybin can raise the blood pressure. And I think she had heart complications due to consuming it, but there was also marijuana in her system. So I think sometimes the research, and this is not to say that psilocybin doesn't come with some risk, okay? Like Des said, there's some, obviously some medications that you don't need to be taking at the same time you're taking psilocybin. There's also some prior personal and family mental health issues that could be, indicated there that might signal that someone shouldn't be engaging in it, and some other physical stuff that could be implicated. So it's not that psilocybin is without risk. It absolutely is. I feel like sometimes that the research community, and I understand where they're coming from, and I don't have any ill will towards them for this, but sometimes I think they blow up the risk a little bit more than what they actually are. But look, I understand where they're coming from, and I'm not going to sit here and say that psilocybin is without risk, because it is. And almost anything that we get, even over the counter, comes with risk. So a lot of it has to do with being responsible and being truthful about what your history is, what your potential for mental illness is, and, what medications you're taking. So again, and like with a lot of things in life, it comes down to a lot of personal responsibility.
I often think that, a lot of that kind of, the really adhering to certain standards in the clinical trials and like talking about the dangers and stuff is for better really, but just that they're trying to legitimize the image of psilocybin and other psychedelics to, like, your grandma who just can't wrap her head around that. And it's, it's important that they do that, and that'll just be another chapter a few years from now where we can kind of broaden that discussion and be like, all right, maybe there's less violence, maybe there's less risk, but that was how we were having the conversation in, early 2000s, 2020.
Yeah, I think I think if they came out and said there's no risk to psilocybin, grandma's top would be so blown that she just wouldn't be able to even comprehend or believe it. So, and I get it. And look, as the trials expand, the safety and efficacy profile will also expand. And then that, again, will kind of further that conversation in 5 years where we're like, maybe not so much as we thought 5 years ago, but still there is inherent risk in partaking.
The most shocking thing I've ever read in psilocybin research dates back to the very, very first psilocybin published study in America. It was shortly after it was discovered the CIA had all these mushrooms shipped to this facility in Kentucky where they did all the like crazy CIA, MK Ultra experiments, and they served the psilocybins drenched in raspberry sauce, to the to the inmates at this facility. So, and a lot of these research studies that you alluded to that are like a little iffy were kind of these early government-sponsored, MK Ultra, experiments where, they were done for nefarious reasons, where they were just giving people psychedelics and not telling them and giving them informed consent. And, so that's kind of muddied the clinical waters in a lot of ways. But, as we were all talking about research, I'm hearing research through a psychology viewpoint where we're talking about clinical studies. That's quantitative research. And you said, kind of anecdotal research. That's qualitative, research. We do studies with 300 people, that's quantitative. But we do an extensive case history with Greg and get his story. That's a qualitative study. And you take those two together, that's a mixed method study, where you kind of do a lot big research with big numbers, and you take it individual stories to give those numbers a voice. That's the kind of the qualitative aspect, and that's a mixed method study. And that's more engaging for the lay people. They go through and they read that, they can conceptualize the numbers, but they hear a story of like Greg or Kes or Andrew or Desmond, okay, that data makes sense now, in my head. So don't you what are your thoughts on your book? And you are kind of that's very quantitative, but you're the qualitative piece, to it, that you're the person, the spirit, the person, the soul behind the story, right? Do you see the value in that type of research, and do you feel like your experience helps legitimize this data that you're presenting? Like, hey, here's all this research I've done, and here's my story. Do you feel like that's part of the healing process, and that helps to kind of illuminate the numbers to give it a soul?
Well, the thing is that I didn't touch too much on my personal story in the book. And here's why. I wanted to seem, at least seem at the time, I mean, the cat's out the bag now, but I wanted to seem at the time for someone who isn't necessarily friendly to psychedelics, who might be on the fence. I wanted them to pick up my book and read that first part and see some purpose in the book, but I didn't want them to think that, oh, he's just some drug-taking hippie that's trying to, run a certain agenda here. I wanted to remain, or at least have the appearance through the first little introduction there, of objectivity. But since I've published the book, and like every interview that I do, sort of like this one, I go ahead and give my story. And I hope it does get out there to people to, put some qualitative value to the book. I did cover, I want to say NYU did a qualitative study for their current phase 2 alcohol trial. They kind of took a few qualitative case studies out of, what they're currently doing. The study's not done yet, but they took 3 or 4 stories out of it and did a study, which I covered in my book. And, I put that in there, 1, because it's part of the overall picture, but 2, it kind of gives the reader an actual indication of what exactly is going on in these experiences, and particularly what kind of insights and what kind of visions these people are having as it relates to their alcohol use, what they're actually in the study for. And I mean, some of it's very profound. I mean, people being visited by their dead relatives and saying they forgive them, and this mutual love, and people puking and seeing that as all the bad that they've done to their body through their alcohol use, leaving them. And just these things that can sort of show people that there's really significant stuff going on here. And, maybe you don't believe it, but some of these insights that can happen in this, 4 to 8 hour experience are so profound that it can literally change your life. Again, with the proper follow-up work and the desire to want to change, things can really happen here. And again, it goes to the qualitative. I mean, it's easy to look at numbers and understand what's going on, but, from a human point of view, and put the human element in it, and it really kind of solidifies what you're seeing in the statistics. I agree with what you said about that.
Yeah. I have a question for you. So you had mentioned that you are a maritime and personal injury lawyer. I was curious if you have had the chance to use your legal experience with the psychedelic community yet, or if you see that potential in the future.
So it's so funny you said that. Yeah. And it came not too long after my book, and I'll just give you a brief rundown of the story. So I published my book, and I was contacted by a guy here in Louisiana who's about an hour and a half of here. He's outside of New Orleans, and he's like, hey, me and some people that I know want to start up an entheogenic church. Kind of start out with mushrooms, and through developing safety protocols and guidelines, maybe, get up to doing, ayahuasca and these other things. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. I said, and I wasn't real sure. So I knew about the UDV case, and I knew that, the Supreme Court had given the okay to some ayahuasca churches, but I didn't know the exact parameters of that. So me being interested, I said, well, let me do some research and I'll get back with you. So once I started researching it, I came to realize that if these people are exercising a sincere religious belief, they can be protected under the law. And, especially with the research going the way it is, let me go back to that real quick. So yes, I did help him work up his state filings as a nonprofit, and then I helped him work up his internal documents to jive with, what the law kind of looks at to determine a sincere religious belief. And what I've come to realize since then is that a lot of these entheogenic churches and people who do ceremonies, and an ayahuasca ceremony is a highly religious practice according to the law. And a lot of people shy away from the R word, and I get it, but according to the eyes of the law, it's a religious practice. So once I got him finished and I let another person in the space know about it, I then was contacted by, I think I've helped about 10 people since then get their stuff together to have these, these churches worked up. And so, what I realized is that, and I going back to the UDV case, and I'll play the research into all this talk right now, is that, so once the court determines under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act that this is a sincere religious exercise, consuming the psychedelic sacraments or entheogenic sacraments, like in the UDV case, ayahuasca, then they go to, it's a strict scrutiny built into the statute. So then the government has to prove compelling governmental interest in that it's the least restrictive means. In this case would be enforcing the Controlled Substances Act. Well, all the way back in 2006, the Supreme Court held 50-50, the safety profile for the members. They said, well, government, you're only showing us maybe about 50% of the way here that this is dangerous. So that doesn't carry, the compelling governmental interest burden, which is way up here. So UDV, here you go. Here goes your DA license. And then also they look into the compelling governmental interest, also look at, are these substances being leaked out into illicit markets? So it's the safety and efficacy and the sacrament handling are those two inquiries. So once I saw that, I realized that there is a hole. I don't want to say a hole, it's not a loophole, but it's actually a protected activity if these churches and retreats follow these certain guidelines. And so since then, I've actually been very active in helping people get their stuff together. Now, I will say this, I'm not just helping anybody that comes to me. They obviously have to, have a sincere religious belief that they espouse to me, and B, some kind of legitimate and safety practice going on. I'm not out here going to help anybody that I personally believe is going to put someone in harm's way. But obviously there's risk to everything we do. But I try to do it for people who I believe in, who are actually out here trying to help people in a safe and responsible way. So yeah, I have been using my legal expertise in this field since I published the book. And look, the research, back to the UDV case real quick, Dennis McKenna and one other researcher, I think back in the late 90s, don't quote me on that, maybe late 90s, had actually gone to, I think, Brazil and did a study on the ayahuasca churches there. And they basically noticed that these people who were consuming ayahuasca, I think on a bi-weekly basis, twice a week, they noticed that they were very healthy physically, very healthy emotionally, and very healthy spiritually. They showed very good, spiritual practice and lived by what they, were espousing as their spiritual beliefs. And that the court in the UDV case was actually really swayed, they found it to be a compelling piece of evidence to justify the safety and efficacy of the medicine, and gave some points to the UDV church, introducing that evidence. So, once I read that, I realized that my book, which covers the research, is very much tied to both the legalization, decriminalization front, and very much tied to this religious front, which I kind of see as the trifecta of the overall legalization and normalization of these substances. So I like to keep up with the research for both causes. And to be honest with you, my opinion right now is that as far as the state of the psilocybin research, the government pretty much has no shot in shutting down a true psilocybin church that has sincere religious beliefs and exercises that handles, the medicine responsibly. My view of it, because it's so developed and the safety and efficacy has been proven, way beyond what DMT has in the clinical realm, although they are starting, from what I understand, phase 1 clinical trials at this moment with DMT.
Nice.
That's really awesome to hear all that, and that you've contributed to all of these organizations. And that's actually particularly exciting for us. Desi and another board member, Kenny, and I are all kind of preliminarily working with a local group here that's working on starting an ayahuasca church. And hearing, how positive your outlook is awesome. I know that Soltara out in Florida, I think they're like really close to getting the thumbs up from the DEA to be I don't know what terms you would use, but a fully acknowledged ayahuasca religion that'll get the pass. Maybe we'll give you a call one of these days.
Hey, just let me know, and real quick it's actually Soul Quest out there in Florida. From what I hear from insiders, they have either gotten the DEA exemption or just about to get it. But let me just say a real quick piece on the DEA exemption. Now, the DEA came up with this exemption process, after the decision on the UDV. Now, a lot of legal commentators have come out and said that exemption process as written is both unconstitutional and against federal law. It was not promulgated in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act. And so, Soul Quest is getting their exemption. However, the DEA and a lot of other governmental entities are being sued right now in the Northern District of California by the Arizona Yage Church and the National Association of Visionary Churches, basically calling out those guidelines and saying, hey, these are unconstitutional and illegal. And so that's currently being litigated right now. And I was actually listening into the court hearing that they had the other day in that case, and the DEA came out and basically admitted that they're in the process of rewriting the guidelines, and that in late 2021 they should have something new coming out. Because what the DEA was essentially doing, because they knew these people were protected under the law, is that they would either reach out to them and say, hey, look, we realize you have an ayahuasca church, you need to file for an exemption. And by the way, you also need to stop practicing your religion in the meantime. Well, that's a First Amendment prior restraint. That's unconstitutional. But from what I understand, every church that's asked for it has continued to practice. They never shut them down. But what they would do is wait as long as possible. I think in the instance of Soul Quest, like 3 years to actually, act on their petition for the exemption. And what ended up happening is that Soul Quest had to pay a lawyer to file in federal court to get the federal court to tell the DEA, hey, look, you got 120 days to get them an answer, or else we're going to give them their answer and they're going to be able to practice. So I've been real current on all the litigation, keeping up with everything, trying to just advise these churches the best way as possible on how they can, safely and freely practice. Because, again, I love the research. I wrote on it. I keep up with it. But I also see this church thing, or the religious or the spiritual aspect in these retreats, as also playing a very important role in bringing healing to people, and also furthering the message that these are, things that are very beneficial, and if done responsibly and in the right setting, can help, overcome this mental, or at least be a piece in overcoming the mental health crisis, that we face in this nation and in the world.
I want to thank you for doing that work, because one, it's like I always tell people it's cultural genocide. You say that if the psychedelic plant medicine is illicit, which means that it's not customary in this continent, which, there's been hundreds of thousands of years of indigenous people using this medicine. So to go in and say you can't have your religion is a type of cultural genocide. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, you were talking about, efficacy studies, and there is that efficacy. When you think about drug development, efficacy is how well does this drug work in a small clinical study? And then it moves on to effectiveness research, which is how well does it work in the general population, in the culture, and in rural America, in urban America, in middle America. And, you know, so they really look at, the FDA really looks at from both angles, you know, these small studies and at large. And if we don't have these churches, you know, where it's not a part of the culture, you know, that really messes things up. And again, I am slapping myself on the wrist. I cut off Andrew right, to do that. So I just wanted to throw the religious aspect out there, and I want Andrew to pick up the ball and continue on with his side.
Well, what I was going to say, it was just so great to hear all that coming from you, because, you know, sometimes I hear things and I'm like, well, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how to interpret this. And you are clearly a lot more well-versed in the law. So that's really heartening to hear from you. And I also appreciated what you had to say about the experience of doing it in a ceremonial context. Speaking for myself, I've gotten a lot of benefits from taking a variety of medicines by myself and taking it with an experienced, you know, facilitator, from, you know, somebody who's been using the medicine in their culture for thousands of years. Really ups the ante. And you know, I guess time will tell, but it seems to me that that really offers an opportunity for healing on a lot of levels, you know, and you can sort of start getting into the level of, you know, the transpersonal level or the planetary level, and, you know, taking personal responsibility for the environment. And you know, that's just an exciting opportunity that we have in working in that context with these medicines.
Yeah, you know, it's just been such a blessing. And, you know, I've realized that, you know, once I started helping these churches, so many other opportunities started opening the door, you know, and that's how I kind of gauge if I'm going the right direction in life. It's like opportunities just start falling in my lap, you know, that kind of shows me that I'm going down the right path. And just, you know, since I wrote the book, I've met and been, you know, contacted by so many people around the world, and just so many just good, very good and interesting people here in the U.S. that are, you know, practicing these medicines, that are truly down in their heart want to help people, and at the same time keep people safe, man. And I agree with that. I'm good with that, you know. And now that and you know, so I did a lot of research on the legal avenue. You know, I'm one of these people that once I get on a research trail, like sometimes I have to literally stop myself and say, all right, walk away, go to bed. So yeah, so I ended up basically reading the whole lineage of religious freedom cases in the United States, leading up through the UDV, all the way to the current litigation. And just read a lot of other materials on it, and you know, came to, I think, a very, very reasonable legal conclusion. And there's a lot of other attorneys that agree with me that if it's done in furtherance of a sincere religious belief or practice, then you're good, as long as you're not, you know, like selling them or anything like that. And you know, I just am glad that I'm seeing so many people kind of get in that avenue. And look, you know, there's substances like, you know, let's take 5-MeO-DMT or Bufo, for example. Like, the only thing you can get out of that experience is like a spiritual type deal, you know what I mean? And almost every practitioner you run across has a very detailed ceremony to go along with that practice. And I mean, it's religious, you know, it's religious. So
I could not agree more. Just since this happens to be my favorite subject, it sounds like you've smoked the toad, you've sat with Bufo.
I have indulged before. Yes, absolutely.
Cool. I'm really glad to hear that.
And I will say this about it, is that it almost eliminated intrusive thoughts of using. A lot of those triggers that I used to have. You know, I think for a lot of people, why it's so good is that you go through life and have these horrible traumas or negative experiences, you know, which I had a lot, but particularly like injecting methamphetamine was something very vivid in my mind. In that ran across certain images or got into certain situations for one reason or another, my mind would go back to that point of injecting and how it tastes and how I felt. Very negative emotional attachments to those experiences, you know, along with other memories I had, you know, like losing my mom. You know, I used to remember just how messed up I felt once I got that news. Well, after that, I mean, I think about it, but there's just no negative, real emotional attachment to it. It's just like, you know, this was an experience. I learned some lessons from it, but there's no emotional response to those memories. And so, you know, I think, and I hope for the future that there is more clinical research, or at least they start clinical research with 5-MeO, because I think the ability for that to like heal an addiction, or I've been to ceremonies where girls who have been raped before, who you could tell were real put off by close contact with guys, as soon as they came out of the experience, the only thing out of their mouth was love and hugs. You know what I mean? Just an immediate overcome of trauma with the medicine, you know, which also in itself does require work post, you know, experience. Not going to say that, but almost immediate 10 to 15 minute turnaround in, you know, relieving emotional trauma. So I hope for the future that the science community picks it up and starts doing some clinical work with it, because I think it's just another tool in the clinician's toolbox in the future. I mean, I know for these practitioners, it's been a very big one, you know, more so than I knew when I first wrote the book.
Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it.
Greg, I'd be curious to know in your research if you find personally that the amount of research and the quality of research is up to par with that of other countries around the world.
You know, from what I understand, you know, the United States is kind of leading, you know, as far as the clinical trials. Of course, a lot of these places like Compass Pathways in USONA are multinational, you know, clinical trial settings, you know, but from what I understand, as far as actual research, the United States is kind of leading the charge at this moment. But I think it's also a multinational effort. And I know that there's scientists from all over the world who are very interested in these medicines and the healing abilities. And, you know, but I will say probably the greatest researchers that are out there are probably like the South American shamans who have been, you know, practicing with ayahuasca for thousands of years. You know, obviously, you know, their practices and use and are informed by thousands and thousands of years, or, you know, 1,000 years of use. But we were talking about actual, you know, data, you know, hard numbers, that's, you know, good stuff admissible in court. You know, I think the United States is probably leading it right now, but also with the assistance of some of these other countries, particularly in Europe.
Cool. Is there any data aside from the clinical trials that you would like to see coming that haven't already been started, aside from the DMT that we just discussed?
Yeah, I mean, so I said they're starting with DMT clinical trials. I think that's great. I think it's real good. But again, I think they need to look into 5-MeO DMT. I think they need to start clinical trials on it. And that's just being informed from my personal firsthand experience from seeing, you know, the turnaround in people, you know, just immediately after the experience. I mean, it, you know, and I tell people, you know, 5-MeO is a literal baptism. It's not, you know, dipping your head in a river. It's literally bathing your body in the universal energy source. And, you know, it's just so enlightening and just, wow. You know, I want science to research that and tell me what's going on, or at least tell me the numbers of the people who are overcome things with it, you know. And just my personal view is that I think this mystical experience that science kind of has trouble with, because they can't really put their finger on exactly what's going on. You know, I don't know if science will ever be able to accurately explain exactly what that is, but for me, what kept me coming back to psilocybin, even after rehab and all these other things, is the mystery that's going on there. Like, what is this? What are these fractal patterns that are like speaking to me through like this emotional language? Like, what is that? And I don't have a good answer. I mean, I could sit here and theorize and hypothesize with you all night. But to have any kind of solid answer just escapes me, like it escapes a lot of people. But maybe there's a healing quality in that, I don't know. But yeah, so I think if I could say one specific piece, I would say 5-MeO, and I would say Ibogaine too. I think because the ability of Ibogaine to help these people with hardcore meth and heroin addictions, specifically in the context of the current opioid crisis and meth crisis, I think it would serve society very well for science to go ahead and kick over some clinical trials and try to get some approval in the United States for, obviously, I would say with Ibogaine, would need medical facilities to engage in that kind of practice. But I mean, whatever it takes at this juncture, I think would be a very smart move.
You bring up a good point. I'm a big iboga component.
Yeah.
It's, I'm sure, one of the things being decriminalized they'll be voting on in DC to decriminalize is iboga. And if a cop walked into my house right now and I had an iboga plant growing, the cop would not know I have a Schedule 1 drug, growing in my living room. And so we'll pass this along to Del Jolly in a couple of weeks. I want to do that plug because from Unlimited Sciences, he's joining us in his Denver-based program doing psychedelic research. And right now they're doing one with Johns Hopkins where I did it, like they mail you like a couple of sorbets, then you eat mushrooms and then report back your experience with the mushrooms. So iboga, ibogaine are on the forefront of, it's kind of like what's next. We all know like MDMA is going to make it through the process. We all know psilocybin is going to be making it through the process, but everyone's looking at, what's next. And I kind of lost my train of thought. Andrew, what were your thoughts?
What are my thoughts?
Or about what he said about like you're big into the toad. So
I love the
toad. To be really excited.
Yeah. I would like to, that if it, I mean, it's horrifying, 5-MeO. But I would love to see that as an option for people. I think it's just like a real clear view into the reality of things, and that can really help to clear out some nonsense and some it can just help you put aside all the crap in your head and just be here and be present, and recognize that there is no other. So this other that hurt you, or this other that you're angry at, that's just you anyway. So how can you hold a grudge or whatever? How can you hold on to trauma? And again, you still have to do all the work after the fact. That's always the case. One thing that came up for me when you were speaking, Greg, you said that 5-MeO is like a true baptism. And what I love about that is I was raised Mormon, and I was first served 5-MeO by a former Mormon missionary. And like, that was so present for me. I was like, this is my baptism. This is like, this guy's doing missionary work still,
Yeah.
And that particular medicine reframed everything. I guess if I was going to see, I think sort of, in my opinion, the thing that is the most accessible to the largest number of people is either going to be ayahuasca or psilocybin, both because of the narrative surrounding those two particular medicines and because they keep you close enough to the earth that you don't just get completely shattered like you do with Bufo.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, the narrative around psilocybin and ayahuasca, outside the clinical setting or in a decriminalized city. Those are probably your two safest bets because the Supreme Court has approved explicitly ayahuasca for religious use. And then psilocybin, obviously, although in the religious context hasn't been specifically approved. But like I say, if there's a sincere religious practice behind it and, the research would go to back up, the participants, court case in that, the government wouldn't be able to prove a compelling governmental interest, against psilocybin. But again, that's why I hope that the research, because I could say this for sure. Someone would not, a criminal conviction for serving 5-MeO-DMT in a ceremonial setting would not stand. It would be considered a religious practice, all things being equal. But would the Supreme Court or would a court have let the government fly on a compelling governmental interest, because of safety or efficacy, because we just don't have much evidence scientifically to bolster the claim that it's safe. With that being said, I'll kind of revert back to a comment I made earlier. I would love to see a university, maybe political science, sociology, and psychology department do some anecdotal studies, go out to some of these ceremonies with practitioners and, survey the people before, after, and, a month after, 3 months after, 6 months after, and formulate some data. So that way, when or if one of these practitioners or ceremonies gets called into question into court, they'll have some ammo in the box to throw out there to the court and say, court, look, yeah, we don't have any clinical trials, but at the same time, when the UDV went to court, they didn't have clinical trials, but they did have this anecdotal research, done by Dennis McKenna, and I forget who the other researcher was, but very well known, and they let it fly. And I think my personal experience with Bufo kind of enforced because, it's intense. It's very intense. And, the unsuspecting person, I don't think they're ready for it. But, with more time, and I think a workup with 5-MeO, my personal opinion is that don't let 5-MeO be the first entheogen that you ever touch. Engage in some psilocybin ceremonies and get yourself in the right, I'm going to say spiritual place to go do it because, I think if you're not kind of already on a decent spiritual footing, it's too much. I've never seen anybody who said, oh, I did Bufo and now my life is crap. But I think in order to really maximize benefits, you got to be at a certain place in, your entheogen experience and, maybe a little bit of overarching spirituality, to handle the toad. But, we'll see. I still don't discourage, responsible practitioners from engaging in religious exercise. I'll just leave it at that.
Sure.
I wanna advertise some interesting research I just saw in Bufo, that they did a urine analysis of people with schizophrenia, and their urine had elevated amounts of Bufo.
Wow.
Just naturally occurring.
Of bufotenine or of 5-MeO-DMT?
Bufotenine.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
So something that, people who have a hard time all the time with sharing the same reality, that we all share, just naturally, produce this in their urine for whatever reason. And that's not to say that, that's just saying that you do the drug right and you have a different experience for 10, 15 minutes, then you come back to reality that reality, if you were to stay in that reality all the time, it would be mentally, you wouldn't be mentally well, to be in that space 24/7, right?
No.
I venture to say if you were in the Bufo experience 24/7, you would not be here, period.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Like here, period. You would not really be living a life, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's interesting, Desmond. I'll get with you sometime this evening or tomorrow and see if I can take a look at that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. So what's your reaction to that, and what's your reaction to thinking that, how does that help you develop empathy for people who have schizophrenia, people who have these mental, disabilities, and that a lot of people stigmatize or look down on, and you've had this experience, and you hear that their body is just naturally producing these chemicals. Does that kind of help you to make sense of their reality and their world, and does that help build empathy? How does that narrative kind of help conceptualize how you think of that population?
So, to be honest with you, my view of that whole thing was informed by Terence McKenna and his anthropological studies, where he found that some indigenous cultures actually revered people who had like schizophrenia and stuff, and actually saw those people as kind of more spiritually in touch, like special in a good way, like not in a way that you shun them, but like you kind of revere those people. That's how and that's just through listening to Terrence, how I've come to kind of see it. I think some of the ancient indigenous cultures might have had it correct that, these people, there might be something to all this that's different than what, the Western world kind of looks at it. And to be honest with you, you telling me that they have bufotein in their urine, in my experience with bufo is a highly spiritual experience, might indicate to me that these people live and exist on a different spiritual plane than the rest of us, one that doesn't warrant us shunning them, but might warrant us embracing them. I'm not saying that, these people should be president or, run a Fortune 500 company, but they definitely shouldn't be treated negatively or stigmatized. I mean, I never thought that prior to, listening to Terrence's talks, but since I've listened to some of Terrence's talks about it and the way that these older ancient cultures viewed it, it informed and completely, not say complete, but it changed my view also, to actually look at them as maybe more advanced on a spiritual level than some of us already are, than some of us are.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, a lot of my psychedelic experiences, particularly like psilocybin or LSD, has kind of made me think that my regular walking around state is insanity, and that this like consensus reality, that's the group hallucination, So I think that kind of jives with what you're saying here.
That's not to say though, Andrew, that sobriety is very important.
Sobriety is very important. Yes, I am absolutely.
Got to integrate those.
Yeah.
No. I think on what you said, it's not very important. Sometimes sobriety is overplayed. That was the whole thing about, the Puritans coming and they shunned the psilocybin, ceremonies from the Mazatec Indians. And it's like, maybe sobriety isn't what it's about all the time. Sometimes it is about leaving that sober mind and having these experiences. And like what Greg's saying, if you're in this space 24/7 and this is your reality, like, that is a special kind of hell, for a lot of, you think about that as your existence. And, like you said, you might not be president or running a Fortune K or Fortune 500, company, but there needs to be a space in our society where you're valued, where you're, however you're neurologically wired, that you're revered and that you're bringing something to the collective table. So, we can all probably think of mental illness, people who've been diagnosed as mentally ill, but still on the same side see their value in what they're bringing to the table, and they add that spice to life that people who don't have those struggles don't bring to the table. So my question is, going through like the addiction process, that's labeled as a mental illness. You've been depressed, you've been through trauma. How do you feel like those experiences have taken you from vanilla Greg to a little bit more less vanilla Greg, where you bring more to the table that you wouldn't have had, had you not had these experiences?
Man, to be honest with you, I mean, I see those experiences as blessings, really. Because with all the work I do today through practicing law 8 to 5, and then coming home and doing the church work, working with my book, trying to be as good of an activist as I can in this space. I mean, it's hard and it's a grind. And, if I wouldn't have had my addiction and all the troubles I've been through being homeless, I don't think I would have ever been strong enough mentally, physically, or emotionally to do the work I do now. So I see all that I went through as the training ground to get me where I am today. Had I not gone through all that, I mean, I just wouldn't be emotionally stable or strong or spiritually fit to engage in the work that I am now. And I really, truly feel like where I'm at now is my true calling in life. I just feel, and look, in the law office is half the equation too. My mother raised me to stand up for the little guy, to, do what I can to help others. And so, at work, we help people that have been injured on the water who no one else wants anything to do with. Corporate America wants to throw them, back in the river, done with them. Once they're injured, done. So there's a real spiritual element for that to me. But, litigating in federal court every day is very hard and taxing. In a lot of the mindset, the tough mindset that I developed to be able to engage in that kind of work was definitely informed through my addiction and time at Synacor. And then flip on over to working with the psychedelic churches and writing books and being an activist. A lot of that was also informed through my addiction and through my depression, because I can easily empathize with the population of people that I'm now out to try to help through this medicine path that, again, that isn't for everybody, but I feel like a large segment of our population can absolutely benefit from. And look, to be honest with you, there's a segment of people in the population who don't have mental illnesses or addiction that could be greatly helped by this medicine, and learn that they can respect other people and respect the environment through using these medicines. And I think that contingent of people is just as critical for overall society in the world to target as the people who have mental health issues. But I empathize obviously greater with the mental health people than I do the other population I just said. But I think they're just as critical to try to reach those people, with the medicine. But yeah, I mean, my mental health issues, my addiction was really a blessing. It taught me so much. I essentially, after law school, went from partner at a law firm to homeless, and now I'm kind of working my way back up. And so I've seen this full spectrum of life. And, I can talk to anybody. I can talk to anybody. I can relate to anybody. And that's given me a special skill set that has really benefited me in absolutely every area of my life. And I'm just very grateful and blessed to have that full spectrum view.
Awesome.
We talk about post-traumatic stress. What you sound like is psychedelics helps build post-traumatic resilience. Post-traumatic stress is, I'm walking down the street, the tree falls in front of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can never leave my house again. I almost died. A tree fell in front of me. How am I going to survive? And then it's like, if I stay at home, I'm safe. Nothing bad can happen. Post-traumatic resilience is, oh my gosh, a tree fell in front of me. Today is my lucky day. I escaped death. And it's that story, and that narrative, that you tell yourself about yourself, and you have that trauma, reaction, and it's all about the story you make about it. Am I permanently damaged? Am I broken because of it? Or am I, is this going to make me resilient? Is this going to, springboard me into something better than what's come before me? So, what are your thoughts on you being resilient as a person?
Yeah, so in specifically with PTSD, I mean, there have been so many events in my life that, I mean, really the first big one was my mother's death. And then in 2014, I was kidnapped at gunpoint and beaten with almost an inch of my life. I had my skull cracked. And it's crazy is that after that happened, I was in my addiction. I felt so sorry for myself and had these doctors prescribing me benzodiazepines. Oh my God, I'm so hurt. Let me get some benzos. But once I got sober and started, I realized that, the psilocybin that I consumed was the medicine, and that held all the answers for me. And what it basically, in a nutshell, told me was that, life is a gift and it's precious. And we don't know one day from the next whenever we're going to go, and that even though we've had these traumatic experiences, we can't let it affect, our future, that we've got to let that go. There's so many things in this world that we can't control that, like you say with the example with the tree falling on somebody. Yeah, okay, so maybe it won't be the tree fall, but you can stay at home and somebody kick your front door in and shoot you. Hell, it might be the police. So psychedelics kind of give you that new framework to put that experience in, and you start to realize that, this event actually helped make me stronger. And then some people take it a step further and go and give their testimony to others with the same problem and try to help them through it. And I guess that's also a form of resilience. But yeah, I mean, I think for the right people that the psychedelics or entheogens can absolutely play a very major role in overcoming that PTSD and moving forward. To that end, I'm in the process of helping a veterans organization in Florida that want to open up an ayahuasca ceremony spot for veterans, obviously to help overcome their PTSD and issues like that. And through helping them, I heard the testimony of several veterans who, absolutely believe in the power of the ayahuasca to help, veterans specifically overcome, the PTSD. And then we're obviously very familiar with, and I support, MAPS research in regards to MDMA, specifically as it relates to their helping veterans, overcome their PTSD with it. And, I think a form of resilience does emanate from the psychedelic experience, specifically as it relates to those issues. And it absolutely has in me. I use it now as a point of strength, not a point of weakness.
Nice. That was really well said. I have one more question that I have been meaning to ask. Yeah. So, we had discussed earlier that a lot of Native communities use psychedelics as a spiritual religious practice. And I'm curious if you've noticed any different approaches to the mentality and beliefs around psychedelic use among people who are struggling with homelessness and those who are not.
Are you trying to get to like, are homeless people seeking out psychedelics, or are they, if you could just clarify just a little bit so I answer your question correctly?
So a lot of the people that I'm surrounded in right now are using psychedelics for like personal growth, but a lot of other people my age, for example, will use psychedelics recreationally at festivals. Okay. Whereas people use it for like spiritual growth. Are there any particular reasons that you have seen in the homeless community on like why they use it?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't, and I've known a bunch of people in my life that are homeless, but to be honest with you, the homeless people aren't really psychedelics aren't really even on their radar. You know, unfortunately, most people that are homeless are usually into heroin or meth or crack. But with that being said, you know, I would love one day to start a fund or start a group that can pick homeless people up and take them to a ceremony of some sort to, you know, try to help them out. I'm not saying every homeless person you're going to pick up, take them to a ceremony, and then the next day they're going to go and you know, put their best foot forward and end up, you know, in a $200,000 home 3 years later. But, you know, I would like the idea of people reaching out and at least giving the homeless people the opportunity to engage in a ceremony. You know, I absolutely believe that some of the insights, if taken seriously and worked upon from a homeless person's point of view, could definitely help them, you know, take the affirmative steps to reach out and get the help they need and get the purity at heart and the sincerity to want to change and do better that someone who is offering help might be able to see in them to extend out the helping hand to get them helped, you know. And that's one of my overarching goals too here in helping these churches and ceremony spots is that I want to encourage inclusiveness in engaging the medicines. You know, but at the same time, we got to realize that this has to be someone's personal responsibility. I'm not going to go try to push the psychedelic or entheogenic message on an underprivileged person or group. You know, it's got to be their want to do it. But I just encourage everyone who has these ceremonies or organizations and even the research organizations to open their arms up and absolutely take advantage of, you know, helping underprivileged groups come into their space and engage in the medicine every chance that they get, you know. But again, you can't force it on people, but, you know, obviously take every chance you can. And that's what I enjoyed about the Peyote ceremony this weekend was all inclusive, you know, all inclusive. And that really warms my heart. You know, to that end, I kind of had an epiphany this weekend that, you know, all these ceremonies and these indigenous beliefs and practices, you know, have been developed over this time to the point to where people kind of associate. And I heard, and this is kind of what spurred it. I heard someone say this weekend, well, you know, peyote, you know, the Mexican and Native American Indians tribe, they pretty much own that medicine. That's their medicine. You know, I kind of think differently. I think these are, you know, from Mother Earth, that we all own these. So to that extent, for y'all's edification, I am in the process of developing a specialized psilocybin ceremony to honor all people of human earth in all cultures. Because as you know, psilocybin is a very ancient sacrament and it grows just about on not say every continent, but many continents across the world. So I want to develop a ceremony that will honor the medicine, honor, you know, opening up the spiritual realm, and honor all people of the world as human beings. And so I want to kind of develop that practice because, look, all ceremonies and practices with these medicines started somewhere. All right. So I think it's time to start one that specifically honors all these people, that doesn't have any cultural ownership, that is just, you know, it's owned by the people who practice it and believe in it. So that's kind of a project that I had an epiphany to create this weekend.
You know, that's a good point. As we're talking about the homeless thing, it really makes me think of like the Initiative 301 campaign, and also on that same ballot was Initiative 300, the camping ban initiative that, you know, had it been successful, you could camp outside as a homeless person and not, you know, be harassed by the police. And, you know, when I was working on the 301 campaign, you know, there were a couple of people who worked on both campaigns, you know, that I'm friends with, but, you know, we thought, you know, we got to be responsible. We want to help, you know, the other campaign, which failed. You know, we got like 50.5%, like 25% of the voters came out for homelessness. And it was so sad, very upsetting. And, you know, and we tried to like think, how are we going to elevate both campaigns? And there was just no way around it. You know, it was just going to look like homeless people want to come here to trip mushrooms, and and all the negative, like Fox News propaganda starts, spinning, and it would have killed both of our campaigns, had we tried to join forces,
Yeah.
as much as that. And and that's the shame about it is, like you said, there is a strong element of mental illness out there and drug addiction, and psilocybin would help alleviate the drug addiction population to be more functioning within society. So I know every time we've talked before, just the first time we've talked face to face or in Zoom to Zoom, you're always like, you worked on the 301 campaign, I want to help you, what's the next thing, I want to be a part of that. And so what's your goal as an activist? Like you've had these positive experiences and you want to give back, like what's your next, what are your dreams as on the activist side, moving forward?
So let's talk specifically on the decriminalization front. I mean, really, one day I would like to fly out and hit the streets with y'all and go collect some signatures and shake some hands, man. That would be awesome. But I think generally just offer my testimony to whoever wants me to come speak at a group, or whoever wants to hear it, even if it's one-on-one. Somebody wants to reach out, I'd be glad to tell them. I'm an open book. I think there's a lot of power in stories. So then also, I also see my work with churches as an activist, actions as well. But really, to let y'all know, I'm in the process of developing an entheogen-based website. And what it's going to be is a platform where people in the entheogen community or people interested in entheogens can come on the website. They can get connected with, well, first and foremost, it's going to be to connect people with these churches and ceremonies. 2, it's going to connect people with movements, with psychedelic societies, with decriminalized nature movements. It's going to be a platform for that. It's going to be a platform for people to meet each other. It's going to be a marketplace where people can sell services. They can sell wares that they make or art that they do. And then it's going to be a harm reduction website where we put, harm reduction. And I hope one day to also elucidate some best safety practices for some of these churches and other organizations that are ministering medicine. And then eventually we're going to have a dating app on it. We're planning on having a dating app where people specifically in the entheogen community can connect with each other, because and this is kind of informed from my experience. And so I'm a single man, 34, and I'm on these traditional dating apps and I meet a lot of women, and look, there's nothing wrong with them. Every date I go on, it's usually with a very sweet young lady that there's nothing wrong with her, but it's just hard for me on an energy level to mesh with these people, and through entheogen use, I've just kind of become so in tune with myself and good with myself and not need validation from other people that I'm willing to hold out to find that right person. And I think a lot of people in the entheogen community are in the same spot. So with that being said, I think that if we connect these people together through an entheogen-based dating app, will help to further the community. We'll have some plant medicine babies, to keep this going on for generations, but that's going to be kind of at the back end of this. But within the next few months, we're going to have the landing page up. We're going to start letting members sign up and just get the platform rolling. And obviously it's going to be a dynamic type thing to where it might evolve over time to be something a little bit different than the way I just described. But that's my next huge step in the activism phase, is to make a platform for people to connect with ceremony, connect with each other, connect with movements from all around the world. That's my next move here. So cat's out the bag. I'm gunning.
Entheomingle. That's my joke.
The name of the is going to be Entheo Connect, and then it's going to be the Entheo dating app.
Is that how people would be able to find it when it is ready to be released? Can they look up Entheo Connect and we can find it?
Entheo Connect. So look, I've got the domain on lock. To be honest with you, I made a goal this week. I'm going to figure out I'm looking for a good web developer right now, because I want to make sure that when I roll this out that it's a good product. I don't want to cut any corners on this, because deep in my heart, I feel like this is a very important step in bringing this to, a larger audience. And so I don't want to cut any corners. I want the site to reflect the severity or the import of the task that I feel in my heart, and so that's why I want to make sure that when I roll it out, it's good. I want to make sure I have a good team, which I'm assembling to help develop this thing. And, I want it to be a good, safe space for people just to share and connect and, just do good things. And I want a good, positive vibe. No divisiveness or negativity on the site, because I will say this, and I've said it in a couple talks on my Facebook page. I think what's important for us as activists in this realm is to really live by the messages that we get from the medicine. To live by the fact that, when you say that you came to the epiphany that we're all one, let's act like that. Let's treat everybody with respect. Let's be adults, and if we argue, do it in a very respectful manner. But, let's come together and just show society that we use these medicines. We come up with these great life-changing epiphanies. And now look at our life now. Look at how we act. Look at what we do. That's the best form of activism. Beyond hitting the streets and all that and getting online and spreading the message. In your everyday life, how do you go about treating other people and doing good in this world? And I want the website to be a place where we come together and group together and then go out from there and work on changing people's minds and hearts.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Me too.
I'll let y'all know. We've got some really good YouTube videos thought up that we're going to do to advertise it. It's going to be good. We're going to put all of our effort and y'all will be happy to see it. I'm glad y'all are happy, because, kind of with my book, y'all, I went through some periods of self-doubt, not big time while I was writing the book, but I always had people in the psychedelic community reach out and say, man, that sounds like a great idea. That's going to be great. I can't wait to read it. Let me know when it comes out. And I'll just let y'all know, when you say stuff like that to me, when I had these small periods of self-doubt, I'll remember that. And that'll keep me going. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for saying that, because sometimes it's not easy when you're putting yourself out there like that. But when people like in this community come out with words and kindness and support like that, it really makes a difference. And so I really do appreciate it.
Good. Well, we mean it.
Thank you.
So your book is series psilocybin. Is there another one coming out after psilocybin?
So I am going to do another book. My first thought was MDMA. That's got a ton of research behind it. But to be honest, my role with these churches has kind of swayed me towards DMT. But again, there's just not a lot of scientific research behind DMT at the moment. Obviously, Strassman did a lot. They got a phase 1 going now, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence with DMT. So I'm kind of in the crossroads, and to be honest, I'm kind of caught up with these other projects, but I will continue the book series. And just to let you know, as I go about my daily life in this space is informing my future books. So while I'm not putting pen to paper, I am getting some research, at least anecdotally, as I move around in the space. And so I will say, even though it might be a little while, my next book will be very informed and heartfelt, and it will be as good as I can do.
Looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, well, look, I'm going to do it. This last one, I grinded it out, man, from start to finish, about 60 days. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of shocked me a little bit, because I really pushed myself. It was during COVID, but I was still working full time at the law firm because I was the only one up there. Everybody else was working from home. But then I'd come home at night and research and write on the book. So this next time I need to just tell myself, look, if it takes you 4 or 5 months to write the book, it's okay. Like I put this artificial timeline on myself, and now I like have it in my head that like got to do a book in, 60 days when that's not the case. If I do a page or two a night is perfectly okay. So I need to just get that in my head and, roll from there. But I will continue the series. I will.
Awesome.
Well, I think we are about set on our time, but did you guys have any other last burning questions?
I don't have any burning questions. Just really awesome to hear you talk, Greg. Really cool, really inspiring, and thank you for making time for us. You're obviously insanely busy, so we really appreciate you taking 2 hours out of your day to share your story. And like, I really appreciated your vulnerability, telling all of the deeper personal things about yourself and in relation with your psychedelic work. I think it's really important to hear those stories, and it can be hard to speak up about it, because it's such personal stuff. So very grateful.
Well, yeah, look, thank y'all for having me, man. Y'all are doing good work up there, and y'all are a lot of inspiration to me, and a lot of inspiration while I wrote my book, seeing what happened in Denver. I started to realize at that point, like this is a movement that has momentum. Let's keep it going. And so that's just kind of been this other part of my life outside of the law firm since then is where can I help? Where can I be of assistance? What can I do? And doing this talk is part of that. But look, I really do just appreciate having me on. I mean, it's just really, truly blessed. I hope one day, hopefully, look, if they open up the ski slopes this winter, I'm going to be up in Denver.
All right.
And if I am, I would most definitely like to take a night or an afternoon or an evening or a whole day and come chill with y'all and, have fun, do something, man. So I will let y'all know if that happens, but I'm going to tell y'all, like I tell everybody, I do never hesitate to reach out to me anytime about anything. I'm here to help any way I can. And like I told you earlier, I will and can talk to anybody. So don't hesitate.
Cool. Thank you.
So we might be, I might have some friends, cough, cough. We're a nonprofit. We don't do political work, but I might have some friends who are gathering petition signatures in 2022. So
okay,
I'll make sure to keep you on lockdown. So
please do.
You just signed yourself up, buddy.
Okay. Yeah.
What about you, Cass?
I also wanted to mention that you have said a few times that you're excited to keep doing work in the future to help with the psychedelic community and the progression of these medicines into more healthy use. And I wanted to mention that this book that you've written is already going to reach a lot of people, like even after all of us are gone. And so you've made an impact, and I'm excited for you for that path that you're going to continue moving forward.
And real quick, let me say something on that. In regards to this website I'm doing, I tell some people about the idea. They're like, oh, you're going to make some good money doing that. And, I quickly stopped them because I had an epiphany maybe a month or so ago. Once I started developing this website idea, it's not about making money to me. It's about leaving my mark on the future generations. I more so than making any money, I would rather, my children or your children sit around one day conducting a psilocybin ceremony without any fear of intrusion from law enforcement and explore their own consciousness in the way that they see fit and say, you know what, that fella George Lake or my dad or, he really did a lot to do this, and we thank him, and, something like that's more what I'm going for. I want history to look kindly upon me. And I think that, helping out this movement and pushing it to full-blown legalization and acceptance would be a good mark for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, it would
awesome. Well, I think we're all four of us are on the right side of history. I'm going to go out on a limb with that one.
We are. We sure are.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we're not on Facebook Live, so we're going to hang up, and Andrew is going to go post this on Facebook. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Hey, look, at any time y'all want me on, just let me know, man. Y'all come up with a topic that y'all think I have some information on, just let me know. I love doing this stuff.
Cool.
The
Great.
ayahuasca
We loved
church.
having you.
Yeah, the ayahuasca church is going to be banging on your door, so
just let me. Look, not only that, like I offer my services for absolutely dirt cheap. Dirt cheap.
Cool.
I do. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank y'all. Much love,
Thank
y'all.
you. Have a beautiful night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.